Hello friends, this is tutorial number 67 in this C++ programming course. In this tutorial we will talk about virtual functions, and let's quickly create one project. We will call it virtual 01. Here is our project, and we want to create a class. Let's create a class. The name of the class will be figure. Without destructor, and here it is. Here is our class. Let's copy this IOStream and namespace standard to our CPP file. And I will use this namespace standard here to figure.age file. Okay, we have created successfully our class, and our class will have one public virtual function, and the name of the function, it will be a double virtual double, and the name of the function will be area. Okay, I will explain you what virtual function can do, and now we will use some inheritance. This will be our base class. We will have also derived classes, but first in the CPP file, let's define this function. When we want to define a virtual function, we just need we will not use virtual here, and we will just use double area. And we will return some value. We can return 0, for example. This means that this function will return just one number, 0. And now let's create another class. Figure 2D, for example, without destructor. Let's create it. We have included it in our project, and first in the CPP file, let's include derived class, which is figure 2D. That's great. And here we will include our base class. And let's extend class figure. And this class will also have just one virtual function, which will be circumference. It will be virtual double circumference. We want to calculate circumference of the circle, and let's define it. We have a constructor, and we will use two dots, and let's use base class constructor, which is figure, and let's define our virtual function, which is double figure 2D, and the name of the function is circumference. And we can return some double value. It can be 0 or 0.5, for example. It doesn't have any sense, but I will explain you soon. And we can also just let this build and run to see if everything will work properly. Okay, we don't have any mistakes, and we can also create one more class. It will be figure 3D without the extruder. And here it will also extend this base class figure, and here in the figure.cpp we will include this figure 3D, and here in the figure 3D.h file we will include base class, and here we will write public figure. That means that it will extend our base class figure, and let's create. We have an default constructor, and we will create one virtual double function. And it will be volume. And let's define it in CPP file. First we need a figure base class constructor, and here let's define our virtual double function. It will be volume, and it can return also some default value. It can return also or 0. It will return 0.5 also. Okay, we have our functions, and these virtual functions we want to use this function to calculate area and circumference of the circle, and also we want to calculate area and the volume of the sphere. We will have two more classes, but what this means, these virtual functions will be run, for example, if in derived class we don't have these functions. If we have, for example, circumference in the circle class, in the some derived class, if we don't have these functions, this one will run, otherwise will be overridden. But let us create first. Let's see here. in the if everything is okay. It should be fine. Now let's create one more class. First let's create circle class without the destructor. Too much classes here. We have included it in our project, and it will extend figure 2D class. This means in the figure 2D.cpp we need to include our derived class, which will be a circle. And let's go back to the circle, and here first we need to include base class, which is figure 2D. Okay, and here we will just write public figure 2D. Okay, this class circle will have one private member, which will be double r, which should be a radius of the circle. And let's create parameterized constructor with one parameter, which will be double r. It will be a radius of the circle, and let's create a double function, which will be get radius, and we will have a circumference function that which will override circumference function from the base class, and we will also have double area function, which will override area function from the figure, which is also a base class. And now let's go to define this. First we need to define a constructor. It has double r as a parameter, and we need a constructor of the base class, which is figure 2D. And let's write this r will be equals to r. Now let's go define other functions. We have double circle. We have a get r function, which will return r. And for the circumference and the area, we need to include CMAT library, because we will need p number. Let's define circumference. It will return. Now we need to use a formula to calculate circumference of the circle. It will return 2 multiplied with r multiplied with p number. It will be m p. This is a p And also let's define area function, which will override the area function from the base class figure. Let's define. Now we need to use a formula to calculate area of the circle. It will be, we will use pow. We need a square of the radius, but it needs to be returned. Return square of the radius multiplied with the p number. And that should be okay. Now let's just build and run to see if everything works properly. Okay, we have no errors. And we need one more class, which will be a sphere. Let's create it. Let's create class of sphere. Too many classes here without destructor. And this class sphere will extend figure 3D class. Here it is, and in the figure 3d.cpp we will include derived class. We will include sphere here, and let's go to the sphere. We will include base class, which is figure 3D. And also let's write here public okay. And also sphere here will have one private member, which will be r, double r, which will be the radius of the sphere. And we will create parameterized constructor with one parameter, which will be radius r. And let's create a function get r, and let's create a function volume. And we need a function area. And let's go to the CPP to define this parameterized constructor double r, and let's use a constructor of the base class figure 3D, and let's write here this r will be equals to r, and let's go define functions. Double sphere. First let's go define get r function. It will return r, which is the radius. Now let's define volume function. Now we need to use a formula to calculate volume of the sphere. It will be 4 multiplied with we need the cube number of the radius, multiplied with p number, and it should be all divided with 3. We will use this inside the brackets, and we will divide it with 3. Okay, this should be good. And now we want to also to define area function. Now we need to use a formula to calculate the area of the sphere. We will return 4 multiplied, we need a square of the radius, let's use POW, R2, and multiplied with p number. Okay, this is the formula to calculate the area of the sphere. Now let's just use build and run to see if everything works properly. Okay, here where I use figure 3D, I forgot brackets. Now I think it is a constructor of the base class. And now let me see. Okay, here let me see where's the problem. Okay, I think that we forgot to include CMath library here. Let's build and run. Okay, this hello world is okay. And now I want to explain. As you can see, we have too many classes. Inside this base class figure, we have area function, which returns 0. Doesn't have sense, but we have defined it as a default. This function will return 0. And this, as I already explained you, this function will run only in the case if in derived class we don't have that function. And let's go to the main. First, what we need to do, we need to include all of these classes. We need to include figure. We will include figure. Just a second. Figure 2D, and also we need to include figure 3D. We need to include circle. And also we will include sphere. Okay, we have included all of these 5 classes here, and now let's delete this hello world. Let's create one variable which will be air, and let's write some message. Enter the radius of the circle and we will input this R. And now we want to create new circle object. Okay, let's create circle. We will call it C1 with pointer will be equals to new circle. But we also can create a base class object. We can create new figure object. We will call it F1 with pointer, but it will not be equals to new figure. We want this figure object, we want to pass a reference to this circle object. Can we do it? Of course we can. And it will be equals to a reference to this C1 with pointer object. And now we want to display this data of the circle. The circle with following features has been entered. Let's write end line. And now we want to display all of this data of the circle. Okay, circle, it has a radius, it has a circumference, and it has area. Now we will go back to the main and let's write step by step. First we will write radius, and now if we want to use we need to use C1. If we want to use F1, it is a figure object and it has only one function, which is area. This means that we need to use circle C1. And we need get R function, and let's write end line. Now we want to display circumference. And we'll write C1. We use this keyword, and here it is circumference. And we also want to display the area. But here we write that the figure object is a reference to this C1 circle object. And we can display a figure. It has only one function, which is area. And now let's use to see which area will be displayed. We will use this area function, and let's use end line, and we will delete these two objects. Delete F1, and we will delete C1. delete it from the memory because we don't need them anymore. As you can see, in the figure we have a virtual function area, and by default it will just return number 0. But this function will be run if in the sum of the derived class we don't have this function. This figure 2D is derived class, is the derived class of this class figure, and also the circle class is derived class of figure 2D. This means that this function, this area function, it appears, it's one of the derived classes of the class figure, and this means that it should override this area function in the base class. Now we will see if it will work properly. Let's build and run, and we have error. Okay, because I didn't put r as a parameter. And let's try to build and run again. Enter, and we have entered the radius of the circle. It can be 0.44. As you can see, we have the circle with following features has been entered. Radius 0.44, circumference is 2.76, and the area is 0.60. As you can see, here we used, just a moment, we have used we used to call f1 function of the f1, which should, as you can see, we define it to return 0, but it didn't return 0. It's because this is only a virtual function. If we don't have the same function, it will run in the case if this is not a virtual function, it should be run. And in the case if we don't have area function, for example here in the circle, the area function of the base class should run. Now I will do some test. For example, if I delete this virtual, for example, it will be just a double function, and let's build and run to see if it will work properly. Enter the radius of the circle. It will be 2.4. As you can see now, we have circumference it's okay, but as you can see, area is 0 because we don't have virtual function. We have figure object and it has a function area, and we define it by default to it's a function that will return number 0, and it's returned. But just a second, if this function is virtual, it can run too, but only in the case if in one of the derived classes, if in derived class we don't have this function. For example, now it's virtual again, and in the circle object we will just comment this area function, and we can try to test application again. Okay, we can type 2.7. As you can see, again area is 0 because we define it as a 0. We have defined it here to return 0, but this function is virtual, and of course it will run if in the derived class we don't have this function, and in the derived class now we don't have that function. That means that we'll run this function. And if we have in derived class, if we have this function, it will override the function in the base class. Now I will uncomment this. Okay, and now I can run it. If I run it again, just a second. Now I will build and run again, enter the radius of the circle, 2.1. As you can see, here is the radius, here is the circumference, and here is the area, which works perfectly fine. Now also, if I delete from the figure to the 2D, if I delete virtual and if I run it again, circumference will be 0. Now let's test it. Okay, radius will be 3, as you can see, but just a moment. Let me see here. Circumference by default we define it as 0.5, but the point is circumference it didn't return 0.5, but I will explain you later. I will return this here virtual. I will explain it better with the next object. Okay, this is okay. Now I will, let's go to the main. We will create sphere object. Because it didn't run circumference, because this is a figure object, it's not figure 2D object. But now let's create, first we will create, let's write some message first. Now we will create sphere object. Enter the radius of the sphere and we will input R again, and let's create sphere object. Sphere S1 with the pointer will be equals to new sphere with R, which is the radius. And now we will create a figure figure 3D object, which will be equals it will be the reference of the S1 object with pointer. Now this is figure 3D object, and now let's go to write a message. Let's use /n. the sphere with following features has been entered. Okay, and line, and now let's write radius and we need to use s1 get r function volume. We have a volume, but this is a figure 3D object. It has a virtual double function which is a volume, and this means that we can use, but we forgot figure to give a name. It will be f2. We will call it f2, and we will write f2. And we will use a volume function. And line, and let's use area. And area, we can also use f2 because it is a function from the base class which is figure, and we can use, this means that we can use it from f2 object, and we will see what we will get. Now let's let's now delete. Now when we don't need it anymore, we will delete f2 object, and we will also delete s1 object. Now let's run to see if everything will work properly. First we will going with circle, it's 1.1 for example, okay. And for the sphere we can type 2.2. As you can see, here is the sphere. We have we have data of the circle, and we have the radius of the sphere. As you can see, we have a radius, we have a volume, and we have area, which is perfectly fine, and it runs. We have a figure 2D object, and we have defined, just a second, we have defined it is figure 3D object, sorry. We have defined volume as 0.5, and this is just a virtual function. Now if I can also delete virtual, and also can delete, okay, I don't need delete virtual from the area, and now I can just run it again. Okay, 1.5 and 2.5. As you can see now, volume is not a virtual function anymore. As you can see now, volume is 0.5, and it's a default value that we have defined it here. And now I can simply put back virtual function. And I can, what can I do? I can delete both functions from here. from the sphere, not from the if here in the sphere I comment both functions and I can comment all here, virtual functions will run where we have defined area as 0 and area is 0 and volume is 0.5. Now we will see if it will run properly. Circle will run properly. Okay, it can be 1.5, which is correct. And now let's 1.7 for the sphere. As you can see, we have volume 0.5 and area is 0. This is the default values that we defined as a virtual functions in the base classes. And it has run because in the derived class we don't have a function, function volume, and we don't have a function area. And when we don't have this function, virtual function will run. Okay, it is important for you to remember that if we don't have a virtual function will run if we don't have the same function in the derived class, which is I hope that you understand it. And now I will just put back this function, and also I will uncomment this. We try to run again. Okay, 1.1 and 2.2. As you can see, now it works perfectly fine. Okay, maybe it's not easy to understand from the first time, but with some if we have a little bit of practice, I'm pretty much sure that you will understand it. But it's not too much complicated. It is just important to remember when the virtual function is running. Only if we don't have the same function in the derived class. And I really hope that you understand it. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. You have a link in the description, and I will see you in the next tutorial.